Hey there, and welcome to the 7th installment of Let's Code. So last time we implemented the socket.io disconnect event on the back end, and we also took that socket.io code and we moved it into its own file to provide a better separation of concerns. On top of all of that, we also addressed a major application domain leakage issue that we were seeing, and we did that by adopting Mithril as the framework of choice for this project going forward. So what we're going to do now that we have Mithril in there is we're going to focus on the user sends a message interaction. And all in all, it should be a pretty good time. So with our goals in mind, let's code.
All right, so let's get our send interaction implemented. So our send interaction is defined as if a user puts in text here, they can send that text to the chat app by either hitting enter or clicking the send button. Anytime a message is sent, this text box should be cleared, and a user cannot submit a blank message. So we'll go ahead and get that implemented now. We can do that here in this entry component. Right now, let's go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup here so we have an easy to manage file. So we'll start that by just creating a view function out here. We'll take the body of this and we will paste it down, and that looks really good. So we'll get rid of this and let's make this a const, and we will add or recompose view into entry like that. Now we are not nested inside of the entry definition, and it'll just be a lot easier to manage. So the first thing we need to do is get our message state in there. So we are going to use a function called controller. And I like to store my state in the controller for doing components like this instead of using a separate view model. And I like to also use these more as a factory than a constructor method. So we'll just create an object factory here. Well, basically it'll return a new object, and we will provide a message property that uses m.props, which is m.prop, which is a helper that Mithril provides. It basically turns your state into a function, or it wraps your state into a function. So you can pass, if I were to do message without any arguments, it's going to return the current value of message. If I were to pass the first argument in, it would set that it would set the state to whatever value I pass there. So very, very good. It works a lot with most of the other portions of Mithril. Mithril is a very functional, feels really good to use, super fun. So how this controller gets into the view is it gets passed in as the first parameter, or the first argument. And from this point, we are going to set the value, and we are going to set that value to the value of controller message, and we will just call it with no arguments, so that way it returns it for us. So to see this in action, all we need to do, well, controller.message is not defined, because I need to compose it into the actual component. So let's go ahead and add controller to the mix. There we go. Now that should be available. And bada boom, there it is. So to demonstrate this, we're going to go ahead and set this to something lovely, something like rainbows. Oh, they are lovely. So when we give this a save, we'll see that the value has been set to rainbows. So that's good. We got one-way binding there. It's always going to set that value whenever it renders, or an event triggers a re-render. It's going to set the value of that text box to whatever this message has been set to. So we'll go ahead and take that off now. All right, so the next part we have to do is the other binding. So anytime this changes, so we'll just do on change, we want to create a handler that will update this message. So they have a neat little handler creator called with attr, or with attribute. So the first parameter to this is what attribute we're concerned with, and that's going to be value. And we want to send our prop into that. So what this helper does is it's going to handle the onChange event by checking the value, by pulling the value of, in this case, value, and passing it as the first parameter to whatever function we have as our second parameter there. So since this is that prop, it's going to set message to that. So that should be all of the binding that we need to do for this text box. Now we need to work on the send and being able to actually trigger a send whenever this is clicked, and all the other behavior there. But now we at least have the state that we're going to be working on. So before we move on, let's go ahead and just create a new branch. We're going to call it more Mithril. Okay. Oh, Mithril. And we are going to, let's just take a look at this. That looks pretty good. Okay, beautiful. All right, so we'll git commit all, set up input binding. All right. So now we just need to head over here and implement the send button. All right, so the next bit we're going to work on here is getting a path for us to be able to send a message. We kind of need a path because we don't want to implement any logic or anything like that inside of the view itself. So what we're going to do is attach a send method to this controller. So we'll go ahead and add it there, and right now we'll just do a console.log this so we have some indication that yes, we made it in there. So we'll head over here, and on click we'll just handle the click portion of it right now. So we'll do on click, we'll go ahead and call controller.send or pass that for that to be the handler. Now one of the things you're going to notice here when we do this is when I hit this button and it calls send, notice what this is reporting. See this right there? What that's reporting is the button itself. And the reason why it's doing that is this is an event handler. So the context has been bound to the element that triggered it. Just like a normal HTML event would, how that would happen. So one of the things we're going to need to do is adjust this context. So we could go ahead and do .bind to adjust the binding, and we'll bind it to our controller. So now it's going to be called within the context of our controller itself. So when we hit this, we should get our controller back. And yep, we got an object, and that object has message and send. So now we can access message on this. One of the things though, this kind of can get lost in the code, bits like that. We can use an anonymous function, and since we're using ES6, we'll just go ahead and use a lambda. It's an anonymous function, but lambdas are much cooler than just your normal garden variety anonymous functions. But we're pretty much just using it as a shortcut for that, or a shorthand. So what we'll do here is in this method, which would be the handler for the click event, we are going to just call control.send. Okay, so now we have that. When we look at our this, it still should be the same. Yep, so now we have access to our message. There's a lot of cool things you can do with lambdas. They are, if you know much about context, they will be bound to the context that their call site is in. So for instance, since we are calling it here, it's part of this view method, and this view method is part of this entry here, where we compose it in. So this, at runtime, when it's running, is going to be pointed at the entry object itself, which is pretty darn exciting. Even though this is going to try to bind it to the element, anything inside of this function itself or inside of this lambda is going to be bound to the context of its call site. That's one really cool thing. The other really cool thing is the last line always returns on a Lambda, kind of like Ruby or CoffeeScript. So that's another cool thing to keep in mind. All right, so moving along here, now that we have that and our context is set up the way that we want, let's see if we can just have an output message or an output method real quick, just so we can make sure everything's working the way we want it to and we're getting the proper message. So if I hit this, it should be blank. Yes, it is. And if I hit test, it should actually pull from that and hit test. So perfect. Notice though, it is not clearing out. I have to manually clear it out. So we can deal with that pretty darn easily. Let's go ahead and we'll add a constant of message. And this message will come from this. And now we can go here and we'll do one of these. And here we can do message and we'll clear it after that. So let's see here. Now we'll do test, bang, and it cleared out after posting, so everything's good there. The other thing though is we can still send blank messages, so we want to fix that up too. So we'll do that with a simple if. So if message, go ahead and do that binnet right there. So we'll do that, come down here, I'll do one of these, bam. All right, so now with that if all up in here, we should be able to just go test, and if we try to hit enter now or hit send now, nothing happens. So that's exactly the behavior that we want. Neat. And anyway, it's working as expected. Okay, so now we have our little entry point here. And we got most of that interaction. What we can do here is we'll just put a little marker here. We'll do a to do, and this to do would be replace with emitter. So we'll have some sort of emitter or something that we're going to pass into this component from the parent, and we will call that with this message call. So that way it should be pretty darn easy to shoot up the line whenever we need to send it to the server. Okay, so now one of the things you'll notice is when you hit enter, it doesn't submit. So that is actually the last bit of functionality that we need to get in there. So let's go ahead, since we got one piece of functionality done, let's do a little GD here, make sure everything looks good. That's adding the send message, and we add click. Okay, so we'll git commit all, submit message with button. All right. So I say we are good to go. Let me go ahead and just give this a save, make sure there's no errors. Oh, man. Okay, so let's just see, what did I change? Oh, the to do. We want that as part of the commit. So let's just go ahead and real quick, we'll do the same thing, and then we'll get rebase interactive, and we'll do head to the 2. Bam. So here we'll go here and do fix up and save that. Get log, and it's like our mistake never happened. So we are good to go there. All right, so the next thing we need to do is get this to submit whenever we hit enter. All right, now the last thing we need to address before we hook this up to the emitter is the ability to hit enter. So I initially changed this from a form to a div. So we're actually going to utilize the same behavior that was originally prescribed. This is no longer going to be a type of button, and we are going to remove the on click of this altogether. So that way it actually just uses the default browser behavior of a button, of a default submit button. and we'll submit the form. So if anything, what that gets us is it gets us an event that we can handle here, and it gets us the behavior of the default send button. So there's always your submit button should submit whenever enter is hit on one of the controls inside of that form. So that's exactly what we want. It's also going to submit whenever that button is clicked, which is also what we want. So what we're going to do is add an onSubmit handler, and this time we are not going to, well, all right, no, we're going to do, all right, control.send, and we are going to call that just like we did before. So, also we need to, yeah, we'll just do it like that. All right, so now what should happen is we do test, and it submits and actually routes. Okay, that's not what we want. So what we need to do is marshal in or send in the event. So instead of dealing with marshaling and putting in and managing arguments, or like using the REST operators, like we could do that and spread them across E here. We could do that, but I don't want to. That gets kind of ugly. It's hard to, how would you say, follow in the code, when we could just go with what we were originally doing and using bind, because bind will change the context for us, but it's a function that accepts arguments, so we don't have to deal with any of the arguments that get passed down the line, in this case the event. So we're going to go back to controller.send.bind, and we're going to bind that on the controller. So now we should, in our send method, our first thing should be an event, or our first parameter. So what we want to do first thing before anything else is we'll go prevent default, and that will stop the form from being submitted. It's not going to work on IE8, but I have very little love for people who use IE, and I have no love for people that use IE8. Yeah, it's just the way I am. It's kind of fella I am. Okay, so now we have that prevent default there. So let's see what happens when we do test and hit enter. It puts test in there. So here we'll do nice and hit enter. It puts nice in there. So it's behaving the way that we want. If we hit enter, nothing happens. Form doesn't submit. When we click the button, nothing happens. And we'll do button click here and click the button, and it still works. So now we have all of our functionality that we need. It behaves exactly the way that it should. So now that we have everything going through the send command, we got our state in message, we now need to figure out how the heck we're going to get that socket that is defined here in our it's on the server public JS index. So we need to get this emit, or this socket. This has a method on it called emit, and that's how you send messages through the through socket.io. So we need to figure out how the heck we're going to get this into this context. So that's next. All right, now that we got the enter to send working, let's just do a quick GST on this. And GD, there's where we're adding our bit to prevent the form submission. There is the binding on the onSubmit for form, and there is the button. So we'll go ahead and git commit all, which will do the add for me. And we will call this implement enter to send. All right, there we go. Let's go ahead and do a get log on this. We got the enter to send, submit message with button, and all of that is looking really darn good. So the first thing we should do is get our goalpost set up. To do that, we're just going to jump into here in sockets. Let's see, here's our little connect function. So we're going to remove this because we no longer need to report that. And looking here, it looks like on chat message, they are going to log the data that was passed to that. So that's what we're going to do. We'll do socket, and then we'll do on, and we are going to look for chat, and I'm going to use a colon for namespacing, message. And then from there, we'll throw an anonymous function in here that does message. So it'll take the message, and we'll console.log message and put message there. Okay, so now we have our goalpost set up. Let's make sure there's no errors. We'll give this a save. With our goalpost set up, we should be able to see anytime a message is sent in our console.log. So as soon as everything's hooked up on the front end, we know that it's working as soon as we see our message there. If that doesn't show up when we think it's working, then we missed the goal and we need to see what we did wrong. Okay, so the next part we are going to deal with is getting this socket.io into, or this socket into our application domain. Now, we don't want to really bring this socket object into our domain. And the reason why is it kind of hard couples, not kind of, but hard couples us to the implementation of socket.io. And anyone that consumes our app will have to use socket.io. So if someone wants to use this on a PHP site or something like that, they're going to have to do a little bit of fancy footwork to get this working. Maybe there's other options in PHP land that are better suited for this. But either way, there's just a simple pub sub here. We need the ability to respond to events, and we need the ability to trigger or send events. So really all we need is a real simple pub sub interface, and we need a way to connect that pub sub in our domain up to this whatever transport is used generically. So we can do that with an adapter here. So we'll just make a real simple object here, just a literal, that defines a adapter. So we're going to have the part we're implementing now, we'll just call that send. Okay, so now with that, we will want to take a name, and we want to be able to send some sort of data, be that a base64 encoded string, be it just normal text, or be it an object or something like that. We need a way to be able to send any type of data. This should be very generic. So what we're going to do here is, what should we do? Well, one of the things we can do is just call this socket emit and pass our name and our data along just like that. So it matches that emit function very, very well in this case, but there might be other bits of tech or something where we'll have to transform this input into a, maybe they take just one object or something as in one parameter. That would be ridiculous to do, but maybe they're doing it that way. We'll need a way to transform it, and that transformation can happen inside of this adapter. So now we have this adapter that we can pass along. So let's get this into our actual application domain. So we will take this bit called adapter and just pass it right along. So let's make sure there's no strange errors. Oh, unexpected token, because people don't like to put equal signs in for some reason. People, man. Okay, so give that a little looky-loo. That's good there. We'll do our test. Yep, we have all of our functionality. We are doing good there. So now this adapter is going to be available here inside of our app through these options that got passed in. So we should have them available here under this .options. So let's go ahead and grab that adapter right now. We'll go ahead and add this and go adapter. So now it'll be assigned to that bit right there. Okay, so adapter comes in as the options. Let's just make sure that that's in there. So we'll do adapter, and this way we can check it every step of the way. it is our send function. So beautiful, that's what we wanted. All right, so now we have adapter in there. We can pass this in as a argument, or not an argument, but an attribute to this, to the actual component there. So to do that, we're just going to jump into a little JSX here, and to do that, we need to bring in the M symbol. Alrighty, so now we can go over here to app layout, and we'll just do JSX on this. So don't forget to close that bad boy out, otherwise you're going to get errors. You're not going to have a good time. And then from there, we can just do, what are we passing in? Let's just do a spread of adapter. Okay, so now that should spread it among the arguments, and everything should be good there. Now let's just see what that did. We can jump into here under components for app layout, and from here we need to add a controller to this. So let's go ahead and we will do the same thing that we did before. We will create a view here. We did this for the app component, or for the entry component. We'll take this out of here, we'll put that in there, bring that back around here, and now we have that as a view function. We can get rid of these lines and we'll compose view back into the mix there. Alright, so now we need to, let's just make sure everything is still working. No errors, and we'll test our functionality. A test, yes, it looks great. Good job there, fella. Alright, so here we're going to add another function, and we're going to call this controller. Alright, so now we have our controller in there. Let's go ahead and compose that bad boy on in here. Controller. And now controller should be part of app layout. And we will just do a real simple console.log allow, and just make sure that we're being called. Cool, so the controller is being instantiated. Now how we get those attributes in here is they get passed in as the first parameter of the controller function. So if we just do attrs there, and we can also do a console.log on that. Alrighty. We should see that we get an object coming in with a send method attached to it. That's because we spread that out. So even though we went ahead and brought in adapter, what we really did was we spread out everything that was inside of adapter into this component here, and the only thing we have in it is send. So if we were to say adapter.neat is equal to true, we would then see, once that saves, we would then see an object that said neat.true and all of that. So we would have those available as properties, whatever they were passed in as, we'll have them available as properties. So anyway, that's just a neat little thing you can do with spread. So now we have a method called send that is inside of our component for app layout.
Ooh, doggy, that was a lot of mashed potatoes for one sitting. Be sure to come back next time where we'll be finishing up the ability to send messages, and we will lay the groundwork for receiving messages. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest videos, be sure to hit subscribe, and if you want to like or comment or anything like that, your feedback is greatly appreciated. So until next time, remember, if you find yourself bored in life, chances are you probably aren't doing it right.